everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I have my first Christmas video of the year. I'm sharing 23 of my favorite Christmas DIYs from last season. Since this is a combination of a few of my videos put together, just keep in mind that some of the projects are labeled a little bit out of order. I really hope that you guys enjoyed today's video. If you do, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it. Now let's go ahead and jump right into it. For the first DIY in today's video, I'm going to be making a sign. I'm going to be using this small wooden piece, and this one came from a Dollar Tree Christmas craft kit that I just recently picked up, but I really wanted to use this piece for today's project. I'm then going to be using a smaller paintbrush to apply my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut. By using this brush, I was really able to get in all of the little grooves of this wood piece. Once I have all of the stain or wood tint applied, then I'm just taking an old rag and wiping away the excess tint. For this project, I'm also using one of these 10-inch unfinished wood rounds from Hobby Lobby, and I'm painting this piece with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. Next, I'm using this old-fashioned sleigh ride stencil from Amazon, and I will have it linked down in my description box if you guys are interested in purchasing it. I'm just taking the stencil and getting it all centered onto my wood round, and then I'm using some painter's tape around all of the edges of the stencil to keep it nice and secure for when I'm painting. The color that I'm using to stencil on the words and then any images that are not the sleigh is from Folk Art in the color Rich Black. Once I got the top portion all stenciled on, I decided to go ahead and use some painter's tape over the sleigh so that I could keep that area white for now, because I'm going to be painting that red here in a minute, and I did not want to get any of the black colored paint in the areas that I'm going to be painting red. So once the paint was dry in the areas that I used the black paint, I'm just taking the painter's tape off, and then I'm using that same tape to just place over the words that are around the sleigh so that I don't get any of this red color on the areas that I just painted black. For the sleigh color, I'm using a Folk Art chalk paint in the color Imperial. Then once everything was all dry, I just removed the painter's tape and the stencil. Then I wanted to add a little bit of distressing to this piece, so I'm using my espresso colored chalk paint from Folk Art, and I'm very lightly dry brushing this around all of the edges, and then I'm also going to be going in up and down motions over top of the front of the sign as well. Next, I'm taking two of my tumbling tower blocks from Dollar Tree, and I'm using some hot glue to attach them together. Then I'm using that same plaster colored paint to paint them the same color as the round so that they match. And then I'm taking my round piece and just getting it centered in the middle slot of the piece that I stained in the beginning. And then I'm just using that tumbling tower pieces that I just glued together. I'm gluing those to the back of my larger round, and then also the wood piece at the bottom to hold it upright. This is what my sign looks like all finished. I love how it turned out. I think it is super cute. It was really easy and inexpensive to create, and I think it has a really good high-end look. Now moving into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm making a wood shim tree, and I'm using 8 wood shims. You can get these at Home Depot in a pack of 12 for just under $2. As you can see here, this shim is larger on one side and then it gets thinner on the other side. And the first thing I'm doing to these is I'm using my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut, and I'm just painting the stain on with a paintbrush and then wiping away the excess with a old rag. What's great about using a paintbrush is you can really get in all those grooves of the wood, since these are a little bit on the rough side. I'm also going to be using this small scrap piece of wood, and this measures 5 by 1.5 inches. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm using that same walnut wood tint, and I'm just painting it on and then wiping away the excess. Next, I'm attaching the wood shims together using some hot glue, but when I'm gluing it on, I'm placing it about 1 inch up from the bottom of the first shim so that it's kind of staggered. And then I'm just doing that with 2 more wood shims, so there's going to be 4 on each side. I'm doing 2 different ones like this since there's 8 shims total. As you can see, I'm leaving about an inch every single time I attach a wood shim on. So here's 4 of them together to make one side, and then I'm just continuing those same steps to do the other side, and I'm just making sure that I'm placing them the same as I did the first side. Now it's time to attach those pieces together, so I'm just taking the 2 side pieces, placing them on the bottom wood piece, and then I'm using hot glue on the bottom of the shim pieces to attach it to the bottom wood piece. And then to attach the very top wood shims into the point, I just used hot glue to attach the 2 pieces. I then laid out popsicle sticks to see exactly how many I needed to line the back of my tree, since I do want to have the back of the tree lined with wood, and it was 15 popsicle sticks. I'm then placing the sticks on top of the back side of the tree and then just marking with a pen where I need to cut them down, and I continued to do that until I had all of my popsicle sticks cut down to the size to fit the back of my tree. After I had all of the sticks cut down, I'm then painting each one of them with my plaster colored paint from Waverly, and then once they've all dried, I wanted to distress them a little bit, so I'm just going around all of the edges first with my espresso colored paint from Folk Art, and then I'm taking whatever is left over on my brush and just very lightly painting that on the middle of each stick. Next, it was time to attach those sticks to the back of my tree. So I just placed hot glue on the back of the wood shims and then placed the popsicle sticks on top of that with the painted side going towards the inside of the tree. Now that those are all attached, I'm going to be needing to make the base for my tree, and I'm using these 2 wood blocks. The larger one is 4 by 2 inches, and I'm just going to be using my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut to give this a nice brown color stain. And then for the smaller 2 by 1 inch block, I'm painting this with my Waverly paint and plaster. Once the paint was dry, I wanted to add a distressed look to this piece as well, so I used that same espresso colored chalk paint to do that. Then I'm using 4 of these unfinished wood letters to spell out the word Noel, and I'm using the plaster colored paint to paint these. Next, I'm placing all of my letters to spell out Noel right on the front of my stained wood piece, just to get them centered before I start gluing them down. Once I have them all placed where I want them to be, I'm using hot glue on the back side to attach them. I'm then using some more hot glue to attach my white block piece to the center of my stained piece, and now this is my tree base. And then now I just need to attach the tree base to the actual wood shim tree, and again I just used hot glue to do that. Now for an accent piece that I want to add to the front of my tree, I'm going to be creating a wreath, and for this I'm using a 3-inch embroidery hoop that I had in my craft stash, and I'm painting it with my Spanish moss colored paint from Folk Art. For the greenery on my wreath, I'm going to be using these stems from Hobby Lobby. These are my favorite around Christmas time. I'm just cutting them down pretty small, and then I'm using some hot glue to attach the stems to the embroidery hoop. And then for each stem that I'm gluing on, I am just tucking it underneath the previous one that I glued on so that there's no gaps in between. And then I just continued to do that until I had them going all in the same direction around the wreath. I'm also going to be using these 2 mini bells that came off of one of these small little ornaments from Dollar Tree, and I just thought that they would be so cute in the middle of this wreath, but I did want to change the color, so I'm painting both of the bells with that rich black chalk paint from Folk Art. And then once the paint dried, I'm using a little bit of a gold colored paint to just kind of distress around the bell and make it look a little bit more vintage. So I used it around the edges, and then whatever was left over on the brush, I just very lightly painted that on. As you can see, some of the paint did come off and some of that silver color was poking through, but I ended up really liking how that looked, and it kind of went with that more vintage feel that I was going for anyways. I then strung both of the bells onto a piece of jute, and then I wrapped them around the top screw of my embroidery hoop and then just tied a knot on the back side. I'm also going to be creating a bow using this red and cream color ribbon that I got from Dollar Tree or Dollar General last year. I'm just making a really simple bow, and then I'm cutting the tail ends of the bow in a diagonal, and then I'm hot gluing that bow right at the top of my embroidery hoop above my bells. I'm then placing hot glue in the center of my wood shim tree to attach the embroidery hoop wreath. And this is what my tree looks like all finished. I love how this one turned out. It was super easy to create, even though it took a little extra time cutting the pieces for the backside of the tree. It was definitely worth it in the end. Next is DIY number 3, and for this one I'm creating pedestal bottle brush trees, and I'm using these 2 wood rounds, and these ones I got in a pack from Hobby Lobby, but they also sell them at Michael's and Joann's. I'm also going to be using these 2 smaller table legs, and I picked these ones up from Home Depot. As you can see here, the table legs do have a screw in the top of them. I tried unscrewing it, but I could not get either one of them out. So instead, I decided that I'm just gonna put a hole right in the center of the wood, and then I can just attach it that way. So here I'm using my drill to drill a hole right in the center of both of my rounds. And then I'm using that folk art wood tint in walnut, since it's my favorite, to stain both of these 2 pieces of wood. And then I'm also going to be using that same wood tint to stain both of my table legs. I then used hot glue inside the hole that I drilled and then a little bit around that area as well. I then placed the screw on the table leg in the hole and then just screwed the table leg all the way down on the wood round until the table leg couldn't turn anymore. And then that extra glue that was on there is just going to make sure that it is in a secure hold. I'm also going to be using 2 of these flocked bottle brush trees from Dollar Tree, and I did get them this year, but because I didn't want to have the bottom that was on the tree, I just used some pliers to cut that off. I'm then going to be drilling a hole right in the very top of my table leg, and then I'm placing hot glue inside that hole, and then with the little wire that's on the bottom of my bottle brush tree, I'm placing that inside of the hole. For a little bit of detail, I'm adding this Merry Christmas mini ornament that came from Walmart, and I'm using some jute wrapped around the table leg a few times, and then I'm attaching that mini ornament to the jute, and then just making sure that that's secure by tying a bow. And for my second tree, I'm using another one of these little mini ornament tags, and I'm attaching it the same way as I did the first one. And here are the pedestal bottle brush trees all finished. I love how these ones turned out. They were really easy to create, and you could switch up the table leg colors and be red and green if you wanted something a little bit more festive. Next is DIY number 4, and for this one I'm creating a sign, and I'm going to be using this unfinished wood sign from Hobby Lobby, and it is from the Woodpile brand. It's $9.99, but I always buy these pieces when they are 40 or 50% off. For the frame of my sign, I'm using a smaller paintbrush to apply the wood tint from Folk Art in the color Walnut, and I did stain the inside of the frame as well. I just used an even smaller paintbrush to apply it, and I did it in small sections so that I was extra precise. Then for the inside portion of my sign, I painted it with my Waverly paint in the color Plaster. For this project, I'm going to be using 2 of these wooden tree sets, and these did come from the Dollar Tree Christmas craft kits, and you can get 1 set of trees in each kit. And I'm just painting all of the tree portions with my Spanish moss color chalk paint from Folk Art, and then once the trees were painted, I needed to paint the bottom portion where it looks like snow mounds, and I'm using my plaster colored paint for those. I'm using that same plaster color around all of the edges of the tree so that it looks like there's snow on the trees. I then decided I wanted to have the back of this piece look rustic and distressed, so I'm using some of my espresso colored chalk paint on an old chip brush, and I'm just very lightly dry brushing that color along the entire back side of my sign. I ended up dry brushing a little bit of that espresso color around all of the snow on my trees as well, just because they looked a little bit flat when I placed them on my sign. I'm then going to be using the stencil that I picked up from Amazon, and I will have it linked down in my description box. I've used it in the past, but I love it so much that I'm using it again. I'm just getting it placed where I want it to be on my sign, and then I'm using some painter's tape around all of the edges to keep it nice and secure. And then I'm also placing some painter's tape on those trees because I am not going to be using those for this design. The color that I'm using for all of the wording is from Folk Art in the color Rich Black. I wanted to add just a little bit of detail to this sign, so I'm going to be using 6 of these unfinished wood stars from Hobby Lobby. I'm leaving them just like they are. I'm not painting them or staining them. I just loved this color with this particular sign, and I'm just hot gluing each one of the stars on top of all of the pine trees. And this is what the sign looks like all finished. Another really easy project. I ended up just having the beads on the top of the sign draped a little bit on the front because I thought they looked really great with the unfinished wood stars. Now moving into DIY number 5, I'm making a directional Christmas sign, and I'm going to be using this wood arrow sign that I got on clearance from Hobby Lobby a while back. The first thing I'm doing is just cutting off some of the ropes that held the sign together, and then once I have the bottom one cut off, I'm just using some pliers to pull the rope through all the rest of the staples. For 2 of the arrows, I painted them with my Tuscan red paint from Folk Art, but since it was a little bit more sheer, you could see through it, and I did have to do several coats of this on both of the arrows. But then once all the coats were dry, I thought it was a little bit too dark, so I ended up going in with my Imperial color to brighten it up a bit. Then for the remaining 2 arrows, I used the matte acrylic paint from Folk Art in the color olive green, and I did have to do several coats of this paint to get all of that wording covered up. I'm also going to be using a scrap piece of wood for this project, and this piece is 10 inches by 3.5 inches, and I'm using that same wood tint in the color walnut to stain this piece. For the base of my sign, I'm going to be using this square wood piece, and this one I believe is from Hobby Lobby, but you can get them at pretty much any craft store, and I'm staining it with that same walnut wood tint. Another piece of wood I'm going to be using for this project is this thicker piece here. This one I actually did get from Hobby Lobby, and it's 21.25 inches long, and I'm just using that same walnut wood tint once again to stain the piece. For all of the words that I'm using on my sign, I did do them on my Cricut and cut them out. This one here that says welcome to the North Pole, I will be just placing it on the stained piece of wood and just getting that all transferred. And I will have a link to all of the cut files down in my description box as well, in case you guys are interested in using them for your own signs. The second one I'm placing on one of the red colored arrows, just says Santa's Workshop. I then did the words Reindeer Games for the first green arrow, and then for the second red arrow I did the saying Elf Village, and then for the second green one I did the words Sleigh Rides. I wanted to add a little bit of color around all of the edges of my arrows, so I'm using that plaster color from Waverly, and I'm just very lightly painting it around all of the edges. And then I took a little bit on a Dollar Tree stencil brush, and I very lightly dry brushed that around all of the wording on all of the arrows. Next, I'm attaching the base piece with the longer wood piece using some hot glue, and then I'm just setting that down and getting all of my arrows and my sign placed exactly where I want them to be. Once I have them set out, then I'm just using some hot glue on the back side of each piece to attach it. For the last little detail on this piece, I'm using some of this greenery stems with berries from Hobby Lobby. I cut 2 little pieces of this out, and then I'm just going to be placing them on the top of the sign. I bent them a little bit since I do have a wire in them. It was really easy to bend, and then I just wrapped them around the left side of the sign, and then I did another one around the right side of the sign. And this is my directional sign all finished. I really love how this one turned out. Again, it was really easy to do, and I hope that you guys like it just as much as I do. Moving right along into the 6th and final DIY for today, I'm going to be making a wreath. I'm using this wreath form from Hobby Lobby, just removing the tag, and then I'm also going to be using some of these wood biscuits from Home Depot, and they are from the Ryobi brand. I'm first going to start by painting my entire wreath form with the folk art chalk paint in the color Spanish Moss. Next, I'm going to be hot gluing wood biscuits around my entire wreath form. I'm just gluing one side of the biscuit onto the wreath form with the other side sticking out, and they're all going to be going kind of in like a diagonal all the way around the wreath. Once I have them all glued on, I'm then going to be going back in with that Spanish moss colored paint and then just painting all of the biscuits. Next, I'm adding a second layer of wood biscuits over top of the first layer, and again, just using the hot glue to attach them, but I'm placing each top layer right over top of the first layer in between where the bottom layer of biscuits meet together. And then I'm going to be painting this top layer with that same Spanish moss colored paint. I then wanted to add what looks like snow around all of the biscuits, so I'm using my plaster colored paint to paint this around all of the edges of the biscuits, and then whatever was left over on my brush I would paint in the center of the biscuits. To create my bow that's going to go on the wreath, I cut a piece of this burlap ribbon from Dollar Tree a few inches long, and then I cut another piece that was a little bit longer than the first piece. I'm then going to be hot gluing the ends of that ribbon together to form a circle, and I did that for both of the pieces of ribbon that I cut. I'm then cutting a third piece of this burlap ribbon, and this is going to be the tail ends for my bow. I just laid it out to the size that I wanted my tails to be and then cut it down to size. I then stacked my two pieces of ribbon that I had glued into circles, and then I'm wrapping a piece of jute around both of them and then just tying a knot on the back side. I'm then taking another piece of jute and then I'm finding where the center is on that third piece of ribbon that I cut, and then I'm just tying that off in a knot as well. I did leave the two jute ends that I had left over on my bow attached because I'm going to be using those to attach to my tail end pieces, but for the leftover jute that I have right here on this tail piece, I am going to be cutting those off. Now I'm taking my bow and placing right in the center of the tail end piece and then using those jute strands on the end of it to tie it together along the back side. Then for the ends of my tails, I did want them to be in a V shape, so I just folded those over and then cut them upward to form a V. I did want to add a little bit of a pop of color, so I'm cutting a strip of this burgundy and cream color fabric from Hobby Lobby, and then I'm making a really simple bow out of the fabric. For the tail ends of this bow, I did want them to have that same V shape, just like I did with my burlap bow, so I just folded the ends over and cut upward to form the V. Next, I'm attaching my burlap bow right at the top of my wreath, and then over top of that bow, I'm attaching my checked bow that I just created. I really wanted to add in some of these frosted berries that I recently got from Hobby Lobby, so I'm just taking some pliers and cutting off a few of these berries, and then I'm just going to be hot gluing them all around my bow. But before I started attaching them around my bow, I did end up adding some of these frosted or snow-covered, well, they're not actually snow-covered, but what looks like snow-covered pine cones, and then once I had the pine cones attached, I just glued the berries around that, and I really love how they look. These are probably my new favorite picks from Hobby Lobby right now. For the very last step, I ended up adding a jute hanger along the back side. And this is what my wood biscuit wreath looks like all finished. I know you guys really enjoyed the wood biscuit tree I made in my last video, so I wanted to add another project using them, and I really love how this one turned out. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be using one of these unfinished wood frames, and this is from Hobby Lobby from the Woodpile brand. The first thing I'm doing is taking my folk art wood tint in the color walnut, and I'm just staining the outside of the frame and then also the back side of this piece as well so that it looks nice and finished. Then for the inside, I'm painting that with my Waverly paint in the color ivory. Then after that paint is dry, I'm using my espresso colored chalk paint on a chip brush and just very lightly dry brushing this color on top of the ivory to give it more of a distressed look. I'm also going to be using 9 of these little reindeer heads that I picked up from Hobby Lobby this year, but I did want to remove all of the little red pom-poms that they had for their noses, so I just scraped them off. They were really easy to remove. I did that on all 9 of them. Instead of those pom-poms, I'm going to be using 9 of these little wooden caps that I also picked up from Hobby Lobby, and I'm just going to be hot gluing those right on the reindeer's nose where the pom-poms originally were. Then I'm going to be painting the wooden caps. On 8 of them, I'm going to be painting them with my rich black chalk paint from Folk Art. And then on the 9th cap, on the last reindeer, I'm going to be painting that with my Imperial color chalk paint from Folk Art. Next, I'm placing the reindeer heads on the frame, just getting them spaced exactly where I want them to be. I am spacing them to where I can have writing underneath each one of the heads, and I am putting the one with the red nose in the center of the frame. Once I have them all spaced out, I am using some hot glue on the back side of each head to get them attached. For underneath all of the reindeer heads, I am doing all 9 of Santa's reindeer's names, and I did cut them out on my Cricut. I will have a link to them if you guys are interested in the cut files. If you don't have a Cricut, you can always use stickers or just hand write them. Here I'm just getting each one centered and transferred right underneath each head. And that was it for this project. This is what it looks like all finished. I think it turned out so cute and it was so easy to do. And like I said, if you don't have a Cricut, you can always just handwrite these or use stickers to create the same look. Now for DIY number 2. For this one, I'm going to be using this sign that I got on clearance at Hobby Lobby. And then I first started by painting the back of it with a red color, and then it just was not turning out and I made a mess of it, as you can see here. So what I did is just remove the back side of the sign and I flipped it over so that I could still use the frame of the sign and not have it like completely ruined. So here I'm just painting the other side of the sign with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. Then for the frame, I'm painting that with my Folk Art paint in the color Imperial. And what was great about having the frame actually removed is it was way easier to paint. And then once the paint was all dry, I then used some hot glue around the inside edges to attach the backing back around the frame. I'm then using these unfinished wood letters from Hobby Lobby to spell out the words Gingerbread and Cafe. And instead of having to paint all of the letters with black paint, I thought it would be way easier to use a black marker. So here I'm just using my black Sharpie to color in all of the fronts of the letters. So if you have a black paint pen or a Sharpie, this is way easier than painting each letter. Another piece I'm going to be using in this project is this mini unfinished wood cutting board, and this came from a Christmas craft kit from the Target dollar spot that I picked up this year. I first painted it with an ivory colored paint and then decided to change it. So here I'm just painting over that ivory color with an olive green colored paint, and then once that paint was dry, I wanted to make the edges pop a little bit, so I use the ivory colored paint to just go around all of the edges and give it a little bit of distressing. Now that I have everything all painted, I'm just placing all of my letters exactly where I want them to be before I start attaching them. To attach them, I'm just using a little bit of hot glue on the back side of each letter. I then did the same thing with the cutting board and the word cafe. I did the cutting board right in the center of the sign and then the words cafe right underneath the cutting board. I'm also going to be using 5 of these little wooden gingerbread men that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. I just thought they were so cute, and I'm using 3 of them with a green bow tie and then 2 with a red bow tie. The one with the green bow tie I'm placing in the center of my cutting board, and then I'm doing the ones with the red bow tie on each side of the one in the center, and then the 2 last green bow ties I'm doing on the outside, like you can see me placing them here. Then to add just a little bit of detail, I'm using some of this pine greenery. I'm cutting 2 really small pieces off of these stems, and then I'm just going to be hot gluing them at the very top of the cutting board right above the gingerbread man. And then I'm doing a really simple bow with a piece of jute, and then I'm going to be hot gluing that right in the center of those two greenery pieces that I've added. Here is the sign all finished. I'm so in love with how this one turned out. Again, another really easy project, and I'm so excited to display it in my kitchen this Christmas season. Next is DIY number 3. For this one, I'm using one of these unfinished wood palette signs from Michaels. And the first thing I'm doing is staining the entire piece with my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut. I just painted on the stain to really get in the grooves of the wood, and then once I had a good amount on, then I would just wipe away the excess with an old rag. Another piece I'll be using for this project is this unfinished wood deer head that I picked up from Hobby Lobby, and I'm painting the entire head with my Waverly paint in the color Ivory. Then once the ivory color was all dry, I wanted to add a little bit of distressing, and I used my espresso colored chalk paint, and I took a small brush and went around all of the edges of the deer first, and then I used that same espresso color on a larger chip brush to go over the front of the deer, and I did it in vertical motions to keep all of my brush strokes going the same direction, and I just really like the look of the distressing on the deer head. I'll be using some of these pine greenery pieces that came off of a Christmas stem from Hobby Lobby, and I'm using some hot glue to attach them around the deer's neck to kind of resemble what would look like a wreath around the deer's neck. When attaching these pieces, I did overlap them underneath a little bit so that it was seamless and you couldn't see any gaps in between the greenery. And once I had this first layer on, I wanted to add a second layer of different colored greenery to kind of just make it pop a little bit more. So I'm using some of these that I had in my craft stash that look like they have a little bit of snow on the tips of them. And then I just added those with the same hot glue right over top of the other greenery that I've already added. Next, I'm using this red ribbon to create a bow. I wrapped it around my 3 fingers twice, and then I'm taking the end and pushing it through the bottom fingers, and then pulling that end piece up and over my fingers, and then there's a little loop at the bottom. I'm just taking that top piece and putting it through the bottom loop, and then back up again and pulling it tight to create my bow. I hope that makes sense. It is really hard to explain how to make a bow, and please don't mind all of the paint on my fingers. So once I have my bow created, I'm then just gonna be using my scissors to cut the ends of the bow in a diagonal. Next, I'm using some hot glue to attach the bow right in the center of the greenery on the neck, and then I'm using this little unfinished wood button, and I'm attaching that right in the center of my bow. Next, I'm attaching the deer head to the center of the wood piece that I stained earlier, just using some hot glue on the back side of the deer head and then pressing it down. This is what it looks like all finished. This one, again, another really easy project, and it looks so rustic. It goes perfect with my rustic Christmas decor that I'm using this year. Now for the fourth and final DIY today, I'm going to be using this sign that I picked up from Hobby Lobby when it was on clearance for $2.49. I'm first going to start by painting the inside of the sign with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. Then I'm painting the entire outside frame portion of this sign with my Imperial color chalk paint. I'm using this unfinished wood mug that came from a Christmas craft pack this year from the Target Dollar Spot, and I'm painting this with that same Imperial color chalk paint. And then I'm also going to be using this unfinished wood candy cane. This came from that same craft kit, and I'm just going to be painting it like a candy cane. I did the ivory color and then the Imperial to paint the candy cane. And then another little piece that I'm going to be using is one of these unfinished wooden snowflakes from Dollar Tree, and I'm painting this with the ivory colored paint. I did create this old-fashioned hot cocoa decal on my Cricut, and I will have a link to it if you guys are interested in the cut file. If you don't have a Cricut, again, you can either handwrite this, or you can use stickers to create a same look. I'm just getting it all centered and transferred at the very top of my sign. And once I have this piece on, I'm then going to be hot gluing the candy cane on the very back of the mug, like you can see me doing here. And then I'm going to be hot gluing the mug underneath the hot cocoa words right in the center of the sign. I'm also going to be using this "Have a Cup of Cheer" decal that I also created on my Cricut, and we'll have a link to this one in my description box as well. And for this one, I'm just getting it centered and transferred right underneath the mug. And then the very last step, I'm just going to be using some hot glue to attach my snowflake right in the center of my mug. Here is the sign all finished, another really easy and simple project. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be creating a standing wreath using this metal circular piece that I just recently picked up from Dollar Tree. The first thing I'm going to be doing is staining the very bottom wood piece on this, and I'm using my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut. Once I have that all stained, then I'm going to be moving on to the wreath portion, and I'm using these really pretty greenery stems from Hobby Lobby. These ones look very realistic to me, and I always pick them up every year. And I'm just starting off by hot gluing each one of the greenery pieces right onto the metal. And I did already cut the greenery pieces down a little bit so that they were shorter and easier to work with. And then in between each greenery piece, I did lift it up a little bit and then put each piece underneath each other, if that makes sense, so that there was no gaps in between the greenery. I'm also using these wood letter beads to spell out the word Noel, and I'm just stringing them onto a piece of jute. And I did get these from either Hobby Lobby or Amazon. Once I have them all strung on the jute, I did make a knot right next to the letter L and then right next to the letter N so that the word stays in place and it doesn't move around on the piece of jute. Next, I'm creating my bow to go on my wreath. I'm using this burlap ribbon with this black trim that I got from Walmart a few years ago, but you can get ribbon like this at pretty much any craft store. I first started by cutting a piece that was about 5 inches long, and then I cut a second piece that was a few inches longer than the first piece. I'm then going to be hot gluing the ends of the ribbon together to form a circle like you can see me doing here. And again, I did that for both pieces of my ribbon. And then once I have them all hot glued together, I'm then going to be placing the smaller piece on top of the larger piece and then just gathering them together in the center. I'm then wrapping a piece of jute around both pieces and then just tying that off on the back side and cutting off the extra long jute ends. I'm now taking a third piece of this burlap ribbon and just cutting it at about 8 or 10 inches, and this is going to be the tail end for my bow. I'm then taking that piece and just gathering it right in the center and then using a piece of jute to tie it off. I am leaving the ends of the jute a little bit longer because I'm going to be using those to tie the other part of my bow together. So here I'm just placing what's going to be the tail ends right on the back of the bow and then just tying the jute along the back side to attach the two. I then wanted my bow tail ends to have a V shape, so I'm folding the ribbon in half and then cutting upward to form my V, and I did this to both of the tail ends of my bow. Next, it was time for me to attach my bow to the top of my wreath. I just flipped this piece over, and then since this already had a metal bar that went across the top, I just used that to tie my bow on. And then once I had it all tied on, I just cut away the extra long jute ends. And then it was time for me to add my Noel word. So to do this, I just added some hot glue on each side of the metal circle and then just made sure that the jute was pulled really tight. And then that was it for this project. This is what my standing wreath looks like. I think it turned out super cute. It was really easy to do, and I just love how realistic these greenery pieces are. Now moving right along into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm creating a wooden snowman, and I'm starting with a scrap piece of wood here that's 13.5 by 2.5 inches. And then I'm using my folk art chalk paint in the color Rich Black to paint the very top part of this piece. I'm also going to be using this paint stick that I've cut down, and it is 5 1/4 by 1 inch, and I'm also painting that with that same rich black colored chalk paint. Then to create the base for my snowman, I'm using this piece that is originally from Dollar Tree, and I've already cut it down, and it is 5 inches. And again, using that same rich black chalk paint to paint this piece. And I will mention I only had to do 1 coat of paint for all of these pieces. Now that I have all of my pieces painted black that I need painted that color, I'm moving back to the first piece that I painted just the top portion of it black. I'm now painting the bottom portion of that piece of wood with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. Then for my snowman's eyes, I'm using 2 of these really small wooden cap pieces, and these are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm painting them with my rich black colored paint. And then I'm using one of these teardrop shaped wood pieces, and I'm just cutting it into the shape of what looks like a carrot, and this is going to be my snowman's nose. And then painting that piece with my Pueblo colored chalk paint from Folk Art. Next, it's time to start putting my snowman together. So I'm using hot glue on the back side of my paint stick to place it right in between the black and white colors, and I did place it on in a diagonal. To attach the wood caps for my snowman's eyes, I'm using hot glue along the back side and then just placing them down underneath the hat. I'm then attaching the little carrot nose, which I do end up taking off and then having to reattach, which you'll see here in a minute. And then for my snowman's mouth, I'm using some of this jewelry wire, and I wanted him to have kind of like a worried, silly mouth, so I'm just shaping the wire up and down in a squiggly shape and then just cutting it off once I get the length that I want. But before I attach his mouth, I did need to add some eyebrows onto my snowman. So to do this, I'm just using some of that rich black chalk paint, and I'm just freehand painting those on above those wood caps that I added for his eyes. And this is where I took off his nose. I just popped it off, and I wanted to add some rosy cheeks, so I used the Imperial colored chalk paint, and I just very lightly dry brushed little circles on around the cheeks, and then I just added the carrot right back into place where I had it before underneath his eyes. For part of my scarf on my snowman, I'm going to be using this cream and burgundy colored fabric from Hobby Lobby, and I just cut a strip of it a few inches thick. And then here is where you're going to see some changes. I added this scarf around my snowman, and I hated the way it looked, so here I'm ripping it off and I'm switching it up. And then I had also added a jute smile, which I'm taking that off too because I didn't like how that looked. And because I wanted the snowman to look more rustic, I decided to dry brush some of my espresso colored chalk paint over top of him just to give him that more like worn or rustic wood look. So that is what I'm doing here, is I'm peeling off a lot of the things that I did not like. Have you ever done a project and you are just not liking the way that it's turning out and you have to like completely redo it? Let me know in the comments down below. Am I the only one who does this? Now back to the original plan of him having this jewelry wire mouth. I'm just using some hot glue to attach it underneath the carrot, and then I wanted to distress his hat as well, so I'm using some of that plaster colored paint that I used for the snowman's body, and I'm just dry brushing that along the entire hat. And then now for the changes I made to his scarf, I did end up using this burlap ribbon that I got from Walmart a few years ago, and I'm just wrapping it around the piece of wood just to see how long I want the scarf to be, and then cutting that down to size. And then I wanted it to look more scarf-like, so I just kind of folded it over where I thought it would look like if you had a scarf around your neck, and then I hot glued it down into place. Next, I'm adding my burgundy and cream color fabric that I had cut around the burlap ribbon, and I just tied it along the front, and then to make sure that it stays into place, I added a little bit of hot glue. And then I did want to have the tail ends of my scarf to have a V shape. So here I'm just cutting a V on both the ribbon and then also the fabric. I'm also going to be using these 2 buttons on my snowman. These are wood ones that I had in my collection, and I wanted them to be black, so I'm just painting them with that rich black colored chalk paint. I could not find my black buttons anywhere, so I'm just painting these ones instead. And then once I have those painted, I also wanted to distress the base of my snowman. So I'm going in with that plaster colored paint once again and just distressing this piece just like I did the snowman's hat. I'm now attaching both of the buttons underneath the scarf using some hot glue, and then I'm also going to be using some hot glue to attach my snowman to the base. I did want to add a few extra little details, so I ended up cutting a second piece of this burgundy and cream colored fabric, and I'm just wrapping it around the top of my snowman's hat and then using some hot glue to secure it along the back side. And then I'm also using some of these greenery stems from Hobby Lobby, and I just cut them down into small pieces and hot glued those right on the right hand side of his hat. I also added a little piece of greenery that has snow on it right in the center of the other two green pieces, and then just cut that down a little bit smaller than what it was. I then wanted to add some of these little burgundy berries. These came from a pick from Hobby Lobby, and I just cut 3 of them off, and then I'm hot gluing all 3 of them around the greenery. And this is what my snowman looks like all finished. He did go through a few changes, but I'm really happy with how he turned out, and I hope that you guys really like him as well. Next, we are moving into DIY number 3, and for this one, I'm using this large paper mache cone, and this is from Hobby Lobby. And the first thing I'm doing to it is just painting the entire piece with my Spanish moss chalk paint from Folk Art. Once the paint has dried, I'm then going to be adding some of these Ryobi wood biscuits, and these ones are number 20. And I did get these from Home Depot, and you can also get them from Lowe's or Amazon. First thing I'm doing is just taking my hot glue, placing it on the back side of one of the wood biscuits, and then placing it on the bottom of my cone. And then here you can see I'm just adding each biscuit next to each other until I have the first layer all the way wrapped around my paper mache cone. Then I'm taking that Spanish moss paint once again and then just painting over top of all of my biscuits. I thought it was a lot easier to paint them while they're on the cone than painting them beforehand and then gluing them on the cone. After the paint has dried, I'm then going to be adding another layer of the wood biscuits above the first row that I just did. I'm doing the same steps. I'm placing the hot glue on the back side of the biscuit, and then only this time I'm placing half of the biscuit on the cone and then half of the biscuit on the bottom biscuit that I attached. And then once that row's all done, I'm using that same Spanish moss color and painting all of the biscuits. And I'm pretty much just continuing those steps until I have my entire cone covered with the wood biscuits. And you may be wondering why I painted the cone the green color, but that's because there might be a few spaces that you can see underneath the biscuits, and I wanted that to be the same color as the tree and not the brown paper mache color. Now that I have all of the biscuits added and everything's painted with that Spanish moss, I did want to add what looks like snow on all of the wood biscuits. So here I'm using my plaster colored chalk paint from Waverly, and I'm mainly focusing this color around all of the bottom edges of the biscuits. But then what is left over on my brush, I just very lightly took that on the top part of the biscuit. Hope that makes sense. So I did that to all of the biscuits on the tree, and then once it's all finished, I wanted to add some of these wood beads, and these are from Hobby Lobby. I just hot glued them along the back side of the tree, and then I just wrapped the beads around until I had them spaced out the way I wanted them to be. I then just cut them to the length that I needed, and then I used hot glue to attach the beads to the very top of the tree so that they stay in place and don't move around. I also wanted to add one of these stars. This came from Hobby Lobby in a pack of stars, and I just thought it was super rustic and cute. So I took the little hanger that was on the top of it off just using some pliers, and then I took some of my toasted brown colored chalk paint from Folk Art, and I just very lightly painted that over top of the star, and I still left some of the original brown color that was on the star poking through, so it was kind of two-toned. I'm then using a scrap piece of balsa wood and then just cutting that down so that it's a few inches in length, and then I'm attaching that to the back side of the star using some hot glue. I'm then taking that star and just attaching it to the very top of my tree. And here is my tree all finished. I have seen a few different variations of these wood biscuit trees, and I think they are so cute. I love the texture of the biscuits. I think it just really adds a lot to the tree, and I just really like the rustic feel of this one that I created. Now moving on into DIY number 4. For this one, I'm using this piece from Dollar Tree, but I've already cut it down to the size that I need, which is 12 inches. And then I'm just going to be painting this entire piece with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. And I did have to do 2 coats to get that wording all covered up that was originally on it. Then once that paint was dry, I wanted to give this a distressed look, so I'm using some of my espresso chalk paint from Folk Art, and I'm just dry brushing it around the entire piece. For this project, I'm using 3 of these styrofoam cones. These ones are about 4 or 5 inches, and I'm also using, for this one, this green yarn from Dollar Tree. I first started by attaching the yarn to the very bottom of the cone using some hot glue. Then once the glue was set, I started just wrapping the yarn around the cone over and over again. Once I had a good amount of the yarn wrapped around, I would just add a little bit more hot glue to keep the yarn in place and so that it won't move around. I kept doing these steps until I had my cone completely wrapped with this green yarn. And as I was wrapping, I didn't stay in any particular order. I just kind of wrapped it however, and it looked a little bit messy, but I really liked the overlapped yarn look once the tree was all finished, like you can see me doing here. Once I got to the end, I just hot glued the end yarn strand on the very bottom of the cone. Next, I'm going to be using 2 of these smaller 2-inch styrofoam cones, and for both of them, I'm going to be doing them in this cream color yarn that I got from Dollar Tree, and I did the same steps as I did with the green ones. I just went ahead and attached the yarn to the cone and wrapped it until it was completely wrapped with the yarn. I also used one of the larger cones to do the 3rd cone with the jute twine, and I did the same steps as I did with the other ones to attach the jute. So I did 2 of the larger cones in green, and then 1 jute one, and then 2 of the smaller cones with the cream color yarn. For the trunks on my trees, I'm using wood dowels that I've already cut down. For the 3 larger trees, I cut the dowels to 2.5 inches, and then for the 2 smaller trees, I cut the dowels to 1.5 inches. And as you can see here, I'm using my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut to stain all of the pieces. Next, I'm taking the dowel and placing it in the center bottom of the styrofoam trees. I'm just pushing it up inside, and then I took it back out, placed some hot glue in the hole, and then put the dowel back in. I did make sure that the 3 larger trees had the dowels inside the same length so that they are going to be standing the same height. And then I was going to leave the very bottom of the trees just not covered up, but then realized that you could probably see the bottom of them, so I decided to add yarn to the bottom of all of the trees. So for the green trees, I just wrapped the green yarn around, and then for the jute one, I did the jute, and then for the ones with the cream color, obviously I did the cream color on the bottom of those. So once those were all finished, I then was able to start decorating all of my trees. For the green ones, I'm using these really pretty bronzed beads, and these did come from Dollar Tree, and I just hot glued the star beads on the tree just kind of randomly where I thought that they would look nice. Then I wanted to add what looked like a garland around the tree. So here I'm using this really tiny white rope. This did come from Hobby Lobby, and I just hot glued it around all of the stars on the tree in kind of like a zigzag shape so that it looked like a garland being wrapped around the tree. And again, I did both of the green trees that I did exactly the same with the stars and the garland. Now to add some detail to the jute tree, I'm using some of this berry garland from Dollar Tree, and it has white berries on it. I started at the top of the tree and then just wrapped the garland all the way down, and then once I had enough on there, I just cut the garland off and secured it to the tree. Then for my two cream color trees, I'm using these gold berry picks from Hobby Lobby. I cut two little pieces off for each of my cream colored trees, and then I just hot glued one of the berries at the top of the tree and one of the berries at the bottom of the tree. Next, I'm using my drill to create 5 holes into my base piece so that I'm able to place the dowels for my trees inside of the holes. And I did use a drill bit that was just a little bit larger than the dowels so that the dowels will fit in the holes nicely. So I did 2 holes on each side, one in the center, and then I was able to center the other 2 that I did in between the end and the one in the middle. I hope that made sense. Sometimes it's hard to explain things. So then once I had all of the holes, I then just placed some hot glue inside the holes and then placed the dowel that's attached to my tree in the hole. And that's gonna make sure that everything stays nice and secure. So I did the 2 green trees on each end, and then I did the jute tree in the middle, and then the smaller cream colored trees in between those. And here are my trees all finished. This was a really easy project, and what I love about this is these colors are very neutral, so you can use this piece with pretty much any kind of Christmas decor. Next, we're moving into DIY number 5. For this one, I'm going to be creating a wood church, and I'm using this pointed wood picket post, and this is from Lowe's, and I've already cut it down to 6.5 inches. And then with those same posts, I cut 2 more of them, only I did them on diagonals instead of having the tops of them pointed. So that you can see here, I'll have a slant for my roof of my church. And then I'm going to be painting all of the pieces with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and I did do 2 coats of paint for these. For the base piece of this project, I'm going to be using this scrap piece of wood that is 4 3/4 by 2 inches, and I'm using my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut to stain this piece. I just painted the stain on and then wiped away the excess with an old rag. I thought it would be a cool idea to add some extra wood pieces for the roof of my church. So I took 4 wood shims and I cut them down to create my roof. As you can see here, these ones are already cut down, but I'll show you how I did that. I just took the wood shims and just placed them on top of the wood pieces I'm using for my church, marked off where they needed to be cut, and then just used a utility knife to cut them down. So I did 2 pieces the size of the pointed roof and then 2 pieces of the size of the slanted roofs. And then I took my folk art wood tint in Walnut once again, and I just stained all 4 of those pieces for my roof. Then it was time to start putting everything together. I used hot glue to attach all 3 of the pieces that I'm using for my church. And then I started hot gluing on the wood shims to create my roof. I started with the top pointed roof first, and as you can see, the wood shims I used were a little bit thicker at the bottom than the top. So I used the thicker part of the shim at the bottom part of my roof, and then the thinner part was at the point. And then I just continued to glue these on until I had all 4 of my roof pieces attached. Next, I'm using a few strips of this balsa wood that I got from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to be creating 2 windows for the front of my church. I'm cutting 6 pieces for each window. 3 of the pieces I've cut down to 1 inch, and then 3 of the pieces I've cut down to a 1/2 inch. So 6 pieces for each window. I'm also going to be using this pointed craft stick for the door of my church, and this is from the Park Lane brand from Joann Fabrics. I just marked off how long I wanted my door to be, and then I used a utility knife to cut the craft stick. Then I wanted all of my windows and my door to have a stained look, so I'm using that walnut colored wood tint to stain all of my window pieces and my door. I used hot glue to attach this wood piece for my door right in the center. And then for the window pieces, I did the larger 1-inch pieces going vertically. I just spaced them out first before I actually glued them down, just to make sure I had them where I wanted them to be. And then I glued each one of them down into place. And then on top of all 3 of those vertical wood pieces, I added the 3 1/2-inch pieces over top. I did one at the top of the window, one at the bottom of the window, and then one going right across the center. And again, I did this for both of my windows. I then thought I wanted to add some detail for my door, so I used a scrap piece of wood that I had laying around just to be a guide for me to draw a straight line right down the center of my door. And I used a pen to do this. I thought that the pen was going to work just fine, but I ended up not liking the way that that looked, so I used the rich black chalk paint, and I just used a really fine tip paintbrush, and I freehand painted right over top of that ink, and I really like the way that that looked a lot better. I'm then using some more of those strips of balsa wood, and I'm just going to be cutting pieces out to frame the door. I just placed the balsa wood on top of the area I wanted it to be at, and then I just marked it off with a utility knife and cut it out. This balsa wood is super duper thin and easy to cut, so it makes doing little intricate details really easy. And again, just continued measuring and cutting the balsa wood down to size to trim my door. Then once I had all the pieces cut out, I painted those with that same rich black paint. Then once the paint was all dry, I used hot glue to attach all of those wood trim pieces that I just made on top of the edges of my door. You can't have a door without having some door handles, so for the handles I'm using these really tiny scrap pieces of wood that were left over from all of the other wood that I just cut, and then I'm hot gluing them right on the front of my door. Then for the color, I just used a color that I had that looked kind of like bronzy, and this one is called Toasted Terracotta, and it is from Folk Art. I'm using one of these mini wreaths that I just recently picked up from Michael's, and I'm taking off the little checked bow at the top. If you want to leave that color on, you could, but I'm taking it off. I actually pulled the wreath apart while trying to remove it, but I just glued it back together with no worries. So I hot glued the wreath right above the door on my church, and then since I wanted this to be a little bit more rustic, I ended up just using a piece of jute and creating a really simple small bow, and then just hot gluing that at the very top of the wreath. And for the very last step in this project, I used hot glue on the bottom of my church to attach it to the base piece. And this is what my rustic church looks like all finished. I absolutely love how this one turned out. It does have a few extra steps, but if you guys have been following me for a while, then you know that I do like to add a lot of detail to my projects. For the first project in today's video, I'm using this wooden tool caddy that I picked up from Goodwill. I paid just under $6 for it. And the first thing I'm doing is just painting it with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. I did do a few coats of this paint, and I also made sure to paint the inside of the caddy as well. After that paint was dry, I'm then using my espresso chalk paint on a chip brush, and I'm just dry brushing this color over top of the entire caddy to give it more of a rustic look. Then for the front of the caddy, I created this Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas decal on my Cricut. I will have a link to it down in the description box if you guys are interested in cutting it out yourself. And I'm just getting it centered and transferred on the front of the caddy. If you guys don't have a cutting machine, you can always just hand write this on with some really pretty markers, or use stickers or wood letters. Next, I'm using some of this floral foam from Dollar Tree, and I'm just placing it inside of the caddy. And I did have to cut it down just a little bit so that I could get all of the pieces fit inside of the caddy. For the inside, I'm going to be using some of this really pretty pine greenery from Hobby Lobby. I'm also going to be using some random greenery pieces that I had left over in my Christmas floral stash. I believe some of them came off of an old wreath. So I like to just use a combination of different colors of greens, and for this I'm just going to be cutting them off of their stems and then placing them inside of the floral foam. I started by placing the greenery from Hobby Lobby inside first, and then I just built it up with the other greenery pieces from there. Once I had them all spaced out and the way I wanted the green to look, then I moved on and used some of these like iced berries, also from Hobby Lobby, and I just cut them off of their stems and then placed them all around inside of the greenery for a pop of color. I thought it would look really pretty if I added some lights around all of the greenery. I was going to use the pack that I just showed you from Dollar Tree, but I opened them up and they actually didn't work. So I'm just using some other ones that I had on hand. These ones, I kind of wish that the wires were a little bit more dainty or green, but like I said, this is what I had on hand, and the other ones that I had purchased for this project did not work. So here I'm just wrapping the lights around all of the greenery, and then this is what it looks like all finished. I think this turned out so beautiful. It was really easy to do, and it looks really pretty lit up at night. Next is a DIY number 2. For this one, I'm using this framed piece from Hobby Lobby. I actually painted it back in the fall and did not like the way it looked. I did not want this frame to go to waste, so today I'm just going to be painting over it to create a Christmas project. For the inside of the frame, I'm using my Imperial Color chalk paint from Folk Art, and I did do 2 coats of this paint. Then for the outside frame portion, I'm using my rich black chalk paint from Folk Art. Then once that paint was all dry, I'm using my ivory colored paint, and I'm just painting that around all of the edges of the frame just to give them a little bit more dimension and more of a distressed look. I'm also going to be using 8 of these gift tags that came from Hobby Lobby, and I'm just going to be removing all of the jute hangers that are around all of the tags because I will not be needing them for this project today. I'm then painting the front and the back of all of the tags with my Waverly paint in the color Ivory. After that paint was dry, I used some of my rich black chalk paint around all of the edges of the tags to give them a little bit of distressing and just to make the edges pop a little bit more. Next, I'm going to be putting these numbered decals that I cut out on my Cricut on all of my tags. Now, if you don't have a cutting machine, don't worry. Dollar Tree has sticker numbers that look almost exactly like this, and those are a great option. Now for this first tag, I'm doing the front and back, and it's going to be on the front side 0, on the back side 1, and then I'm going to be doing one single tag with just the number 2 on it. And this is going to be for like one side of the numbers that I'm doing for my countdown to Christmas. Then I'm going to be doing an entire second set of numbers that are numbered 0 through 9. And again, I'm doing the front and back of the tags. So it'll be a tag with 0 and 1 on it, a second tag with 2 and 3, and then so on and so on. I hope that makes sense. Next, I'm going to be getting this Days Until Christmas decal centered and transferred at the very top of my sign. If you guys are interested in the cut file, I will have it linked down in my description box. If you don't have a cutting machine, again, you can use some really pretty paint pens to write this on your sign. Next, I'm putting the tags on my sign, just making sure that they're centered and everything looks correct before I just mark in the top holes of the tags where I'm going to be wanting to make holes in the back of my sign with my drill. Now that I have my spots all marked off, I'm just using my drill to drill holes for my little hangers that I'm going to be adding later on. So these are the ones that I chose to use. I really loved this like goldish bronzy color to them. I did get them from Michael's, and then I'm just taking them and screwing them into the holes that I just drilled out, and they actually worked perfectly. You can get different sizes, but I went with these larger ones since my tags are a little bit larger. Then I'm just placing my tags onto the hooks. You could leave the sign finished just like that, but I wanted to add some detail. So I'm using 2 sets of these bell ornaments from Dollar Tree, and I removed the little greenery that was on the tops of the bells, and then I'm also removing the little tag that holds the bells together. I then painted all 4 of my bells with my raw sienna acrylic matte paint from Folk Art. I did do 2 really messy coats of this paint. I wanted the bells to have a little bit of texture to them and for them to look kind of old. Then once that paint was dry, I went in with my espresso colored chalk paint and just dry brushed this color over all of the bells to give them more of that old distressed look. Then to add a little bit of detail, I'm using some of this pine greenery from Hobby Lobby, and I'm hot gluing it in the top corners of both sides of my sign. Then once I have that added, I'm then hot gluing the bells that I painted over top of the greenery. And then I wanted to add a little bit more of a lighter green color, so I'm using some of these greenery pieces that I had in my craft stash. I'm cutting a few small pieces off and then just gluing those at the very top of the bells. And then to add a little bit more detail, I'm using a strand of jute to create a really small bow, and then I'm hot gluing that at the very top of my bells. And again, I did this for both sides of my sign. And here is my Days Until Christmas sign all finished. I love how this one turned out. To me, this looks like an item that you could purchase in a store. It was super easy to create, and I know that I'll be using it for years to come. Next, we're moving on to DIY number 3. For this one, I'm going to be using this unfinished wood crate that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. And the first thing I'm doing for this one is painting it with my Imperial Color chalk paint from Folk Art. And I am doing the entire piece in this color. I'm then using 2 of these dowel rods from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to be painting them with my rich black chalk paint from Folk Art. I did end up using a 3rd dowel, and I forgot to show that, but I did the same thing with it. I just painted that with the rich black colored paint as well. I'm then using 4 of these wooden wheels. These are also from Hobby Lobby, and I'm using that same rich black paint to paint all 4 of the wheels. And then I'm using 1 of these tumbling tower blocks from Dollar Tree, and I'm also painting that with that same black colored chalk paint. I ended up cutting a really tiny piece off of one of the wooden dowels, and this is going to be the little handle on the wagon that I'm creating, and again using that same black colored paint. For this project, I'm also going to be using 4 of these unfinished wood caps. These are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to be using these for the center of my wheels, and I'm using my ivory colored paint from Waverly to paint the tops of all 4 of the caps. Next, I can start putting everything together. I'm taking my dowels and then I'm just pushing the wheels onto the ends of my dowels. I did one end first, and then for the second end, when I put the dowel on, I just kept putting it onto the bottom of the crate and then just pushing the wheel on more and more until I finally had it to where when I put it on the crate, it was tight and there was no gaps away from the edges of the crate and the wheels. And again, I did that for the second dowel and the second set of wheels. Then it was time to attach the dowels and the wheels to the bottom of the crate. So I just moved the dowel over a little bit, placed hot glue on the bottom of the crate, and then put the dowel back into place. And I did that for both of the dowels and the wheels. I used hot glue on the back side of all of my wooden caps to attach them to the center of all 4 of my wheels. I'm then using some hot glue on the bottom of my tumbling tower block to attach it to the bottom of my crate, like you can see me doing here. Then I'm going to be attaching that 3rd dowel that I had painted right onto the tumbling tower block and the very top part of my wagon. Then once I have that attached, I just need the little scrap piece that I had painted, and this is going to be the handle for my wagon, and I'm attaching that with some hot glue. I'm also using this small rectangle piece of scrap wood, and I'm painting it with my ivory colored chalk paint. Then once that paint was dry, I'm getting this freshly cut Christmas trees decal centered and transferred onto the piece of wood. This is a Cricut Designs base design. I did not create this one, but I will have a link to it down in my description box. I did want this sign to be framed at the top and bottom, so I'm using one of these balsa wood strips that I got in a pack from Hobby Lobby. I'm measuring it to the size that I need, and then I'm just cutting it with some scissors. This balsa wood is very, very thin and is easy to cut with scissors. Once I had one piece cut, I then used that to just measure my second piece and then cut that down to size. I'm then using my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut to stain both pieces of wood. I'm then using hot glue on the back side of the strips of wood to attach them at the very top and the bottom of my sign. Now that I have my sign all made, I'm attaching it to the very front side of my wagon. I'm going to be using 5 bottle brush trees from Dollar Tree in this project. I just removed the little snow bottoms that were on all of the trees. They're really easy to just pull off. And then once I had those all off, I did want to add some lights around all of these trees. I am using some of these wired lights from Dollar Tree. I just wrapped them around each tree as I was placing it inside of the crate. And what's really great about this project, it's super easy to hide the little battery pack for the lights. You just wrapped it up and stuck it under the tree and you wouldn't even know that it was inside. This is what the project looks like all finished. It is so super cute, really easy to do, and I just love how this is lit up and it looks really cute at night. Moving right along into the fourth and final DIY for today, I'm using one of these unfinished wood frame pieces from Hobby Lobby. And the first thing I'm doing is taking my folk art wood tint in the color walnut, and I'm just painting this wood tint on and then using an old rag to wipe away the excess tint. I did do the back side of this piece as well so that it looks completely finished. And then I'm using some of this plaid paper. This one I think is from Hobby Lobby, and I placed it on the front of the frame, and then I just kind of bent the paper over where I need to cut so that it will fit inside of the frame. Once my paper was all bent, I'm just using some scissors to cut it out. Then I'm using some Mod Podge on the back inside portion of this frame piece, and then once I have the Mod Podge all applied, I'm then placing my cut plaid paper right over top of that and then just pressing out any of the bubbles and making sure that the paper is flat. I have already printed out this Silent Night music sheet. It is a free printable and I will have a link to it down in my description box exactly where I got it from. And then I just printed it on like a yellow colored piece of cardstock, and then here I'm just cutting it out, and I did size it down to 5 by 7. I'm then applying some of my Mod Podge on the back of my music sheet, and then I'm taking that and just placing it in the center of the plaid paper that I've already applied. I'm making sure to press out any bubbles, and then I did end up having to use a little bit of extra glue on the edges just because this was a piece of cardstock. It was a little bit harder to get to lay down flat. You can see that when I'm adding this jute around all of the edges of my music sheet, some of the paper is a little bit crinkled, but the paper was still wet while I was doing this. I did not wait for it to completely dry down, but once the paper dried down, it laid flat. So here you can see I'm just adding the jute around the music sheet with some hot glue. Next, I'm going to be creating my own wreath with some of this like greenery, strand, garland. I'm not really sure what this is called, but I did get it from Hobby Lobby. I just wrapped it around twice to the size of the wreath that I need because I do want to double it up, and then I cut that with my pliers. And then I'm just taking the two edges or the two ends of the greenery, and then I'm just wrapping them around each other together to make sure that I have that circle shape and it stays in the circle shape. I'm then using some of this burlap ribbon with some gold trim on the edges from Dollar Tree. I'm wrapping it around the very top of my wreath, and then I'm taking that ribbon and pulling it over the very top of my frame, and then the ends of the ribbon I'm securing on the back side of the frame with some hot glue. Next, I'm making a bow. I'm using the same ribbon and I wrapped it around my 2 fingers twice. I'm then taking the end of that ribbon and pushing it through the very bottom of the strands of ribbon between my fingers, and then pulling this strand up and over my 2 fingers and then putting it through the bottom loop and then pulling it tight to create my bow. I then removed the bow from my fingers, shaped the bow a little bit so that it looked nicer, and then for the ends, I just cut those in a diagonal shape. For the very last step, I hot glued my bow right to the very top center of my wreath. And this is what the project looks like all finished. Another really easy and affordable Christmas decor project. For the first DIY in today's video, I'm going to be using this scrap piece of wood that I had in my craft stash. You can get wood like this at Lowe's and Home Depot. And I started staining this piece and then I realized I wasn't supposed to be staining it. I wanted to be painting it a white color. So here I'm just going to be painting over that stain with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. Then I'm going to be using 4 of these unfinished wood Christmas trees. I can't remember exactly where I picked these up, but I believe they came from Dollar General. And I'm going to be painting all 4 of these trees with my Folk Art matte acrylic paint in the color Green Olive. After that paint is all dry, I wanted it to look like the trees had a little bit of snow on them, so I'm using my ivory colored paint and just very lightly painting this around all of the edges of my tree. For this project, I'm using 3 of these unfinished wood little mini house cutouts, and these came from Michael's just recently. They had them with their Christmas stuff in the front section of their store for I think $2.99 for an entire pack, and you get a ton of them. I'm just going to be using my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut on these. I thought they would look really cute just stained next to the green trees. I'm also going to be using these wood letters that say Merry Christmas. These are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm just painting all of the letters with my Folk Art paint in the color Imperial. Next, I start putting everything together. I'm using hot glue on the bottom of the tree and attaching it to my piece of wood, and I did start with the tree all the way on the left. Then next to the tree, I hot glued one of my little houses. Then I did another tree next to that house, and then you probably guessed it, I did a little house next to that tree and just continued that same pattern until I was completely finished attaching everything. Then for all of my wood letters, I'm just placing them where I want them to be on the very front of my piece of wood underneath the trees and the houses. Once I have them all placed, then I'm just using hot glue on the back side of each letter to attach it. After I had all of the letters attached, I did dry brush the ivory color over top of them just to give them the appearance like they have snow on them. And then the very last step, I'm going to be using one of these battery light packs from Dollar Tree behind the houses and the trees, and I just secured the cord down or the little wire with some hot glue. And then you can always use a little bit of heat on the glue if you want to remove it later on. And this is what it looks like all finished. I think it is so cute, really easy to do, and it looks really pretty lit up at night. Next, we are moving into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm using this round piece that I picked up from the Target dollar spot on clearance, I believe last year. I think I only paid $1 for it. And it did have this little handle on the top, and I just used my screwdriver to unscrew the screws and remove it. I'm then painting my entire piece with the Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. For this project, I'm also going to be using this mini unfinished wood house. This did come from a Christmas craft kit from the Target dollar spot this year, and I'm painting the base part of the house with my Imperial colored paint. But once I got that painted on, I thought it was a little bit too bright, so I ended up painting my Tuscan red color from Folk Art over top of that just to deepen it up a little bit. That same craft kit that I got the first house from also came with this house as well, and for this one I'm painting the base part with my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Castle. For one of the doors on my houses, I'm using this small rectangle piece of wood that came from an assortment wood pack from Dollar Tree, and instead of painting it with paint, I'm just using my black Sharpie to color the entire piece. I'm also going to be using a smaller second rectangle piece that also came from the assorted wood pack, and I'm doing the same thing, just coloring over it with my Sharpie marker. For the windows on my houses, I'm using another one of the small rectangle pieces and then also a circular shape, and I'm doing the same thing, just coloring over them with my black Sharpie marker. For the roofs on both of my houses, I'm using my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut to stain them. For the house with a chimney, I'm painting that with my rich black chalk paint. Then for the circle window, I'm just going to be painting on with my ivory color across in the center to make it look like this has windows. And then for my little rectangle piece that I'm using for my door, I just painted on what would look like a door handle, and then I used the ivory color around all of the edges to look like trim. For the second smaller rectangle piece, this is going to be windows on one of my houses. So I did the same thing. I went all around the edges with the ivory color, and then I also did lines going vertical and horizontal for the appearance of windows. Then to attach my doors and windows, I just used some hot glue. I did the smaller rectangle door on the red house, and then I did the circle window above that. Then for the gray house, I did the larger rectangle door right in the center. And then for the smaller rectangle piece that I painted like windows, I just attached that right above the door. I thought it would be cute to add these mini wreaths from Michaels. I didn't really care for the checked ribbon at the top, so I'm just using my scissors to cut those off. I wanted a little bit more of a rustic look for these. So then I'm just using some hot glue to attach the wreaths right above or over top of the windows. And then I'm also going to be adding my own little bow that I'm creating here with a piece of jute. I did 2 bows, one for each wreath, and then I just hot glued the bows at the very top of both wreaths. Next, I'm adding my houses to the round piece that I painted earlier. I'm just using some hot glue to attach them. And then I'm also going to be using 3 of these bottle brush trees from Dollar Tree. I'm just using some hot glue on the bottom of the trees to attach them right behind both of my houses. I did one of the larger trees on the left, the smaller tree kind of in front of that in the middle, and then another larger tree on the right side. I'm taking these 3 little pieces of stick that I've cut down, and I wanted to make what looks like a small campfire in between the 2 houses. So I just hot glued one down to the actual base, and then I hot glued the other 2 kind of up on each other to create a campfire. Next, I'm attaching 3 of these little gnomes that I got from Hobby Lobby. I think they are so cute and would be perfect for this project. You'll see here that I'm going to be attaching them to the base with hot glue, but I do end up removing them and changing them around a little bit. But I wanted to show you how they look because you will see them here in just a second before I actually move them around. And then I'm going to be using this little fencing for what looks like a walking path up to the houses. I just undid the wires of the fence and I removed the little post, and then I just kind of laid them out to see how many I would need to go all the way to the edge of my bottom. And I ended up using, I think, 4 in front of the red house and then 5 in front of the gray house. So once I had them all removed, I'm then just going to be cutting that pointed top part off because I did want the little walking path just to be straight across. I did not want them to have like a post point on them. Once I had all of my posts cut down, I'm then using my black Sharpie to just color them black instead of painting them. Now that I have them all colored black, I'm attaching them in front of each house door. And like I said, I did 4 of them in front of the red house and then 5 of them in front of the gray house. And I did leave a little bit of a space in between each one that I attached. Originally, I had wanted to do 5 on each side, so I did have an extra one left over that I colored black, and I will be using that for this little Merry Christmas sign. This is also from Hobby Lobby, and I ended up just attaching the little Merry Christmas sign to the black post that I had that was left over. I then attached it to the right side of the gray house, and then I realized I was not liking this setup, so I ended up just removing a few of the gnomes and switching them around, and I ended up just using 2 of them instead of 3. And then I moved the little Merry Christmas sign. I ended up just putting it on the left side of the red house where the gnome is. You can see I took him off and added the sign there instead. And then I found one of these little lamp posts. This did come from Dollar Tree, and I just added it to the right side of the red house. This is what the project looks like all finished. I love how it turned out. I think it looks so cute, and you can really switch it up and put whatever you want on something like this and just make it fit with your own personal style and decor. Next up is DIY number 3. For this one, I'm using one of these plastic snow globes from the Dollar Tree. The first thing I'm doing is just taking off the top and removing the tag that's inside. And then I'm taking the very top part and painting that with my rich black chalk paint from Folk Art. I'm also going to be using one of these wood pieces from Hobby Lobby, and I'm doing the same thing to this one. I'm painting the entire piece with that black chalk paint. For this project, I'm using this mini red truck ornament that I picked up from the Target dollar spot this year. And the first thing I'm doing for this one is just removing the top jute hanger. And then to conceal that a little bit, I'm using my Imperial Color paint. I then needed to create a base for my truck, so I'm using 3 of the tumbling tower blocks from Dollar Tree, and I'm hot gluing all 3 of them together. Once I have them all stacked and glued together, I'm going to be hot gluing the red truck right on top of the tumbling tower blocks. Next, I'm using my drill to drill a hole in the very top center of my snow globe. Then I'm going to be taking the truck on the base and placing that inside of the snow globe to where the base part is where the hole is in the very top of the snow globe. I'm then going to be using the screw and I'm going to be placing it inside of the hole that I drilled and then up through the wood base for the truck so that everything stays in place. I was having a little bit of a hard time holding the truck and screwing the screw in, so here my husband was so nice enough to do it for me. I'm then taking some Epsom salt that I had on hand and just pouring it about an inch or 2 in the bottom of the snow globe. And then I just used my Cricut tool to get it out of the tree. Next, I'm going to be placing the top and the lid back on the snow globe. And then I'm going to be using some hot glue right in the center of the wood piece that I painted and then attaching the snow globe to the wood base. To add a little bit of detail to the top, I'm wrapping a strand of jute around the top twice and then just tying a really cute, simple bow. I wanted to add some detail to the very bottom of the snow globe, so I'm using a few different greenery pieces that I had in my craft stash, and I'm just hot gluing them all around the bottom of the snow globe and the top of the base that I'm using for my snow globe. And once I have that on, I thought it would be really pretty to add some of these frosted berries that I had picked up from Hobby Lobby, and I'm just cutting those down and gluing those around the top of the greenery. And this is what the project looks like all finished. I think it turned out so good. I had so much fun creating this one, and I would have got a few video clips, but it is so hard to take pictures and video of anything that's glass or reflective see-through. Next up is the 4th and final DIY in today's video. For this one, I'm using one of these pieces from Dollar Tree. I'm sure you've seen them a million times before. It's just this little dome. And the first thing I'm doing is removing the large tag that was on the side of it. And then I'm going to be using one of these larger bottle brush trees from Dollar Tree. I actually think this is the medium size one. And then I'm removing the bottom base that's on the tree. They just pull off really, really easily. And then I'm also cutting off the wire that sticks out from the bottom of the tree because I need my tree to be just a little bit shorter. I'm then hot gluing the tree in the center of the bottom of the dome. Next, I'm going to be decorating my tree with these frosted berries that came on one of these Christmas picks from Hobby Lobby. I cut the berries off so that they're individual, and then I used some hot glue to attach them to the tree. And I just randomly placed the berries inside of the tree. I then wanted to add what looks like snow around the bottom of the tree, so I'm placing some hot glue right on the base and then just putting Epsom salt on the glue to attach them together. I continued that same step until I had all around the tree covered. I then placed the top of the dome over the tree, and then for the very last step, I took a strand of jute and just tied it around the very bottom base of the dome. And this is what it looks like all finished. It was such an easy project that only took a few minutes to create. And that's going to wrap it up for all 23 projects. I hope I was able to give you some inspiration for this upcoming holiday season. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it. It always helps out my channel. I would love to hear in the comments down below which project from today's video was your favorite. Thank you so much for watching.